I've never felt this comfortable in many spaces of a lot of people. As a child, I ended up wandering off by myself or bumping into something or mumbling too much basically every time my parents took me somewhere. They'd silently stop me in public, but they scolded me for once when we got home. Maybe they wanted to change me to act normal, but just made me instinctively avoid situations where I could mess up. 3 days ago, my parents told me to drive to the mall and go inside. Once I arrived at the parking lot filled with cars and people, I was terrified of hitting someone or getting hit. After parking at the very edge, trying to calm down, I figured I feel comfortable enough to get out after spending a little time alone in my car, but ended up waiting until the sun was just above the horizon and the mall was almost closed. I walked up to the mall and near the doors once, twice, thrice, but couldn't bring myself to go inside. Like if I mess up, bumping into someone, stepping on someone's foot, acting too afraid it would get back to my parents somehow, and they even yell at me for even though I went in the store. I went back to my car, then for the third attempt, sat there even after the other cars were gone, and the sky and the mall were both dark. When my father called, he asked me how the mall was. I stammered something about how the stores looked nice, but he knew I was bluffing. I stared at the horizon as he started loudly scolding me, wishing I was somewhere else. That's when I noticed the details in the mall and the space around it slowly fading to black, as if the night sky was swallowing them. I told my father about it, but he was hung up on the fact that I hadn't gone to the mall. Ignoring his rant, I started driving up towards the advanced darkness, half hoping that I could get him to stop yelling at me if I brought up something more interesting. My mother was yelling at me too by the time I reached the edge of the darkness. From a closer vantage point, I found it eerily pretty. The darkness advance point was almost like pulling itself up across the ground. It left light sources and paint on the ground untouched until almost the second last. It looked so like floating in the void, combined with the pitch black sky. It looked like a wall of ink was covering the entire world. I snapped a picture on my phone and sent it to my parents. In response to this terrifying, beautiful phenomenon, my mother scoffed that the picture was now how it normally looked, and my father whined that I had to focus getting into the mall. Before I could take any more pictures, the cars started sputtering. The edge of the darkness had reached a car. While I hadn't paid attention, and even I was backed out of range, inky tendrils were already climbing up the hood. I didn't want to find out what would happen if I entered the darkness, so I drove home, only stopping when I saw the ground up ahead being engulfed by the same all-encompassing void. I reversed until I was completely far from the darkness and stared cautiously at it. There weren't any other cars or people on the street, so I couldn't watch to see what had happened when they entered. The only option was to go in myself, but I wasn't sure if I should take that chance. If you don't take that chance, which one you would take? I felt like I heard someone whisper into my ear, but I couldn't remember that voice what it sounded like. As I looked around in alarm, more whispers trickled my brain. I have watched you for quite a while, and I can confidently assert that nobody else would give you any chances. Think of the choices your parents will make when they determine the course of your life. When do you get to say in them without being underestimated? It was true, I rarely, if ever, had a word to say in that. If I object to anything, my parents would badger me until I gave in. I figured that it was normal. In fact, this is unusual. Your parents are your only confidants, yet you refuse to productively help you improve. With no avenue for self-betterment, you still stubbornly cling to the world. Why not escape it forever by death? I had to ask myself that question before, when I felt especially hopeless. I really felt my parents wanted me to be better, and I didn't think they deserved to have a child who'll take their own life. Despite what the voice said, I still had out hope that life would improve. More importantly, I hated the idea of someone stumbling into my dead body without warning, because I didn't want to cause people trauma. Most importantly, there was no guarantee of success, even if it wasn't possible that I would fail and lose what little freedom I had. Your reasons for saying are unreasonable, but I still think you might accept my offer. If you drive into the darkness, you will be painlessly erased from the world. Your body will not frighten anyone, and there is no chance of failure. I actually considered an offer for a second. This took care of my two biggest problems with death, but it just made the other ones more competent. I was really willing to throw my life away and leave my parents reeling. That, of course, was the issue of with death. You must accept that your life will never improve in order to cut it short. But do you really want to waste your entire life in a painful rut? Sinking in further and further into despair, when you could simply take my advice, accepting the gift of sure and quiet death? That made me wonder, how was this voice so sure my life wouldn't improve? Surely there was an ulterior motive? Your skepticism is deserved, and I will answer you honestly. I am taking you from this world and bringing you to another one. You will not have the moral high ground here, but you'll have a purpose to which you are exclusively suited. I reckon that it's better than this life. Darkness around me slowly cleared until the sky shuttered with stars and the road in front of me was perfectly clear. I will give you 3 days to think about it. If you accept my offer, return to the parking lot 3 nights from now. By the time I reached home, my parents were asleep. They screamed at me in the morning, but I had trouble paying attention, to the point my mother grabbed my face and forced me to stare at her as she talked. All I could think about that moment was that I'd rather be dead. For most of 3 days, I was conflicted. Logically, the right choice was to live. The voice had no proof of my life would improve, and I had no proof of it that it wasn't lying about everything. Really, I thought, it's most likely the whole thing was some kind of complicated delusion, and this whole debacle will end with me being medicated. But I couldn't trust the voices knowing what was best for me. But did my parents know what was best for me? They couldn't help but yelling at me. But that was all they tried. I decided to be assertive. Just once, and I'd say a different breakfast time from theirs. My parents screamed at me for expecting an entirely separate dish, and they didn't stop until I was crying. They also refused to discuss my encounter with the encroaching darkness, either beginning to complain about something else or making some kind of loud noise which startled me, like barking at me to shut up or slamming a cabinet. I normally tried to assume the best of them, but I started to wonder if I was in the wrong direction. It all came to my head for the third afternoon. In other words, this afternoon, when I blurted out that I wanted to die. My parents were furious, bringing up how much work it took to raise me, and how it would only hurt others if I died, while periodically insulting me for entertaining this idea. Then my father said something which cemented my final decision. You want to die, but you don't want to go into a mall? When they were done, I ruminated on what they said. I did want to feel comfortable in malls, but I also wanted to make my parents happy. Whenever I went inside or stay outside, they yelled at me. It dawned on me that they were doomed to be unhappy with me, but I had to ignore them. I chose not to go in the parking lot. Instead, I stayed in my room as day turned to night, made a list of all the things I was afraid of doing. Every time the fear only stemmed from upsetting my parents, I wrote down on the date which I do it. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so invigorated. That's when my mother raced into my room and frantically asked if I knew anything about the darkness slowly engulfing the house. She explained to my father that she had tried going through the darkness to get outside and find help, but he wasn't back yet. As we sat in my room, my mother finally listened to me talk about the darkness without interrupting. Explaining what had happened made me happy, even though my mother was undercut those feelings shortly after. I finished by saying, she didn't regret yelling at me. Neither did my parents ever hit me. Untrue, and other people were going to act as far worse than them when I got older. I decided to try something I'd never done before. I started loudly scolding her about yelling at me, instead of figuring out better ways of helping me deal with the stress and blame her for the anxiety about doing things. She had asserted me that I had to toughen up, or I wouldn't be able to live without her. I responded by saying my life would be better without her. I honestly didn't mean it, but it's what I said. She slapped me, and when I pointed that she hit me, she slapped me again. After groaning that she should have listened to me, she walked back in the darkness to find my father, ignoring my protests and twisting out of my grasp as I tried to hold her back. I was alone with the darkness once again. As I watched it through the door frame, I was confused as to why it had followed me in the house. Forgive me. I have believed you would come to agree with me without your hand being forced. I never intended to respect your decision if you did not. I am no longer willing to humor you. That said, I'm still holding out that you will enter the void willingly. Take as much time as you need. The darkness didn't advance through the door, as I threw a lot of things into the void, like socks, comic books, and they all disappeared after a few seconds. Curiosity, and vanity led me to stick my foot in it. The inside of the void felt exactly the same as my room, until it felt like needles were being shoved into my foot. When I stumbled backwards, parts of my foot weren't covered with the inky black were bright red. I felt shearing pain when the black disappeared and it left gashes on my flesh. If I had truthfully expressed how painful the darkness would be, would you have entered it? If you had gone further into it, would you have been died almost as if the pain began, like your parents did? I assume my parents wouldn't be affected by the darkness. I finally started crying as I thought about how awful their last moments must have been. I implored you to look at this opportunity. You are no longer tied to this world by your parents, and you can move on to the next without guilt or regret. If I recall correctly, you have no other reason to enter the void. 3 days ago the voice was correct, but now I have one more reason. Spite. My parents, for all their faults, at least claim to be helping me. This voice just wants me to die, even killing my parents to achieve it. At this point, I hate having to starve myself to death just so it doesn't win. Almost the entire room was covered in darkness for now, so even though I'm technically able to avoid entering it, I have to barely move in practice. The voice keeps begging me to enter the void willingly, as if I'm not dying of starvation, just to make it suffer. If the voice really watched me for so long, it should have watched me constantly fall to enter a mall. I am bad at many things, but I've decided my last act on Earth will be a testament of how good I am at stalling.
What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.